They thought they were going to freeze to death in their car on that mountain road. But when they spotted an abandoned cabin through the blizzard and broke inside to survive, what they found hidden in the basement safe would expose the biggest financial crime in decades and change hundreds of lives forever. Before we explore the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning had started with promise. Harold Mitchell stood in his daughter's kitchen in Denver, watching the sun paint the mountains gold, while Sarah packed sandwiches for their drive home. He was 73 years old with hands that still remembered 40 years of United States Forest Service. Work, rough hands, scarred from pine bark and tool handles, steady hands that had built ranger stations and rescued hikers and never stolen a thing in his life. "You sure you don't want to stay another day?" Sarah asked, pressing the sandwiches into a small cooler. The weather report mentioned snow. "Light snow," Harold corrected gently. "And your mother and I have been through worse. Remember that storm in '89? Dorothy emerged from the guest bedroom, her silver hair still damp from the shower, pulling on the thick cardigan she'd knitted herself 3 winters ago. At 71, she moved with the careful grace of someone whose body had earned every ache. Honestly, 3 decades teaching 3rd grade, always on her feet, always bending down to a child's level to explain why reading mattered, or why kindness was braver than cruelty. "What storm in '89? She asked, smiling because she knew exactly which storm he meant. "The one where we got stuck at the ranger station for 3 days, Harold said. "Ate nothing but canned beans, and played gin rummy, until you beat me 47 games straight." 48, Dorothy corrected. "You always forget that last game." Sarah watched her parents with the mixture of love and worry that comes when your parents age, and you realize one day they won't be there to correct your math or pack your sandwiches. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Take the southern route if the pass looks bad." "We promise," Dorothy said, kissing her daughter's cheek. "We're cautious people. Always have been." They loaded their 12-year-old Subaru with the efficiency of people who'd been married for 51 years and had long ago figured out who packed what where. Harold handled the cooler and their overnight bags. Dorothy carried the smaller items, her book, Harold's reading glasses, the thermos of coffee Sarah had insisted they take. Their grandchildren spilled out of the house for final hugs. Emma, the oldest at 19, studying environmental science at Boulder. Michael, 17, all elbows and basketball dreams. And little Sophie, just turned 9, who wrapped her arms around Dorothy's waist and said, "I love you, Grandma. Drive safe." "We will, sweetheart," Dorothy promised, stroking the girl's hair. "And when you visit us next month, I'll teach you how to make those chocolate chip cookies you like. The ones with the brown edges, those exact ones." By 9 in the morning, they were on Interstate 25, heading north, Denver shrinking in the rearview mirror. Harold drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the console, where Dorothy could reach it if she wanted. They listened to old country music, the kind from the 70s that they danced to when they were young and stupid, and so in love, it hurt, and didn't talk much because they'd never needed to fill silence with noise. The first flakes appeared around 10:30. Just a few, gentle and lazy, drifting past the windshield like they had all day to reach the ground. Harold noted them, but didn't worry. He'd driven through mountain snow his entire adult life. He knew the difference between weather that threatened and weather that just complained. "Getting heavier," Dorothy observed an hour later. She was right. The gentle flakes had multiplied, grown aggressive. What had been a dusting on the road shoulders was now a thin blanket across the asphalt. The car in front of them had its wipers going steadily. "Want me to take the southern route?" Harold asked. "Add an hour, but it's lower elevation." Dorothy looked out at the mountains rising ahead of them, now disappearing into grey clouds that hadn't been there an hour ago. Something in her chest tightened, not quite fear, but its quieter cousin, caution. "Let's stay on track," she said. "But if it gets worse, we turn back. One parlor, deal." Harold agreed. It got worse. By noon, as they climbed the winding mountain pass toward Cedar Springs, their small town 3 hours northwest of Denver, visibility had dropped to maybe 30 feet. The wipers beat a frantic rhythm against snow that fell so thick it looked solid. Other cars had pulled off, hazard lights blinking orange through the white. Drivers too scared to continue. Harold kept going because he'd been trained for this, because he knew these mountains, because turning around now meant backtracking 15 miles on a road that was probably already impassable. Forward was the only direction that made sense. "Can you see the road?" Dorothy asked. Her voice was calm, but her hands gripped the dashboard. "Barely," Harold admitted. "But I can feel it. Tires are still gripping." The Subaru climbed higher. The temperature gauge showed 28 degrees, then 26, then 23. The snow that had been falling was now a full blizzard, wind-driven and violent, hitting the windshield like someone throwing handfuls of white sand. Harold's knuckles were pale on the steering wheel. His eyes burned from staring into the endless white, trying to distinguish road from shoulder, trying to stay between the invisible lines. Dorothy had stopped talking, just sat perfectly still, her breath steady, being the calm Harold needed. Then the engine coughed. A wet, rattling sound that didn't belong. "No," Harold whispered. "Not now." The car shuddered. The engine coughed again. The dashboard lights flickered once, twice. Then the battery light blazed red. The engine died. Power steering went dead. Harold wrestled the wheel, guiding the coasting Subaru to what he hoped was the shoulder. They rolled to a stop. Silence, except for the wind, screaming around the car and snow hammering the roof like a million tiny fists. Harold turned the key. Nothing. Turned it again. A clicking sound, weak and fading. The cold had killed the battery, or something worse. Either way, they were sitting in a dead car on a mountain pass in a blizzard with the temperature dropping fast. "Options," Dorothy said quietly. Not a question, but a request for Harold's ranger training to kick in. "Stay or go," Harold said. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course not. They were in a dead zone. Had been for the last 20 minutes. If we stay, we have maybe 3 hours before hypothermia becomes a real problem. Our winter coats will help, but not enough. And if we go, Harold looked out the window at the whiteout conditions. We could get lost 10 feet from the car, walk in circles, freeze faster, but we might find help, Dorothy finished. Might find shelter. They sat in silence for maybe 30 seconds, which felt like 30 minutes. The car was already getting cold. Their breath fogged the windows. The snow built up on the windshield, inch by inch, burying them alive. "I saw something," Dorothy said suddenly. "About 5 minutes before we stopped. Through my window. A dark shape, like a building." "How far?" Harold asked. "Close. Maybe 100 yards off the road. Could have been anything. Could have been a shadow. But it was something." Harold made the decision, the way he'd made every important decision in his life, by trusting Dorothy. "We go. Stay connected. If we get separated, we stop moving and yell." They prepared quickly. Harold grabbed the emergency kit from the back. Flashlight, matches, energy bars, a thin mylar emergency blanket. Not enough for survival, but better than nothing. Dorothy wrapped her scarf around her face until only her eyes showed. Harold pulled his ranger hat down tight. "Ready?" he asked. Hand on the door handle. "No," Dorothy said, "but let's go anyway." The moment Harold opened his door, the wind tore it from his grip and slammed it back. Snow invaded the car instantly, swirling, blinding. He forced the door open again and stepped out into knee-deep powder. The cold hit him like a wall. Not just cold, but the kind of cold that bites through layers and finds skin immediately. The kind that makes your lungs hurt with each breath. He came around to Dorothy's side and took her hand. She squeezed it, hard. They started walking. Each step was a battle. The snow came up past Dorothy's knees, almost to her thighs. The wind pushed them sideways, backward, tried to knock them down. Harold kept his free hand stretched in front of him, feeling for trees, rocks, anything. "Angle left," Dorothy shouted, though she was right beside him. The wind stole her words. "That's where I saw it." They angled left, away from where the road should be, into the unknown. Every instinct Harold had screamed that this was wrong, that you never left the road in a blizzard, that you stayed with your vehicle. But every other instinct said 3 hours in a dead car equaled death. They walked for what felt like an eternity. Harold counted steps. 20, 30, 40. His legs burned. His face was numb. Dorothy's hand in his was the only real thing in a world made of white noise and freezing wind. 50 steps. 60. Maybe they'd been wrong. Maybe there was nothing out here. Maybe they were walking away from safety, instead of toward it. Then Harold's outstretched hand hit wood. Solid. Real. Unmistakable. A wall. "Found it!" he shouted, pulling Dorothy close. She collapsed against him. Exhausted, they felt their way along the wall. Harold's fingers traced rough-hewn logs, gaps where mortar had crumbled. A window frame shuttered tight. This was a building, a substantial one. Then his hand found a corner. And a few feet past that, a door. He tried the handle. Locked. The door was solid wood, thick, with a deadbolt he could feel under his numb fingers. He put his shoulder to it and pushed. Nothing. Pushed harder. The door rattled but held. "Move back," he told Dorothy. She stepped aside, and Harold kicked just below the handle where the lock mechanism would be. His foot hit solid wood and sent pain shooting up his leg. He kicked again. Again. On the 4th kick, something cracked. On the 6th, the wood around the lock splintered. On the 7th, the door burst inward. They stumbled inside and fell to their knees on hardwood floor. The wind followed them, howling through the open door, but Harold crawled back and shoved it shut. The sudden quiet was so complete it felt like falling into deep water. For a long moment, they just breathed. Harold's lungs hurt. His face burned with cold. His fingers were so numb he couldn't feel them. Beside him, Dorothy was breathing hard, her scarf crusted with ice. "Are you okay?" he managed. "I think so," she said. "You?" "Yeah. Just, yeah." Harold pulled out his flashlight with clumsy hands and clicked it on. The beam cut through darkness and revealed something that made him freeze. This wasn't a ranger station. This wasn't a hunting cabin. This was somebody's home. A nice home, The flashlight beam swept across a room furnished with leather armchairs and a sofa that looked expensive. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel decorated with a clock that had stopped at 3:15. Bookshelves lined another wall, full of hardcover books with dust on their spines but not decay. The floor was hardwood, covered partially with a rug that had once been beautiful and still was, just faded. "Harold," Dorothy said softly. She was standing now, looking around. "What is this place?" He moved deeper into the room, the flashlight revealing more details. A dining table with 6 chairs tucked beneath it, a kitchen area with dark cabinets, and a propane stove. Dishes in a drying rack beside the sink. Everything dusty, but intact. Everything preserved. "It's like someone just left," Dorothy said. "Got up one day and walked out, planning to come back. But they hadn't come back." That much was obvious. The dust on every surface told that story. The stale air, cold but not frozen because the walls were thick and well insulated. This place had been empty for a while. Maybe months. Maybe years. "We need heat," Harold said, forcing himself to think practically. They were out of the wind, but the cabin was still cold. 40 degrees, maybe. Better than outside, but not enough. Not for long. He checked the fireplace. The flue opened smoothly when he pulled the handle. Beside the hearth, someone had stacked firewood, neatly split logs, dry, ready to burn. Harold grabbed a handful of kindling from a bucket and arranged it in the fireplace. His fingers were starting to work again, painful but functional. Dorothy found matches in the kitchen, a whole box, and brought them over. Harold struck one, and the flame looked like a miracle. He touched it to the kindling, and the fire caught immediately, spreading through the small twigs and into the larger pieces. Within minutes, flames were crackling. Real heat, pushing back the cold. They moved close to the fire, holding their hands out, not saying anything. Outside, the blizzard continued to scream. Inside, warmth slowly returned to their bodies, along with the realization of what they'd just survived. "We should have died out there," Dorothy said quietly. "But we didn't," Harold replied. "We found this place. Pure luck. Or providence," Dorothy suggested. Harold didn't argue. He wasn't a religious man, but he wasn't above being grateful to whatever force had put this cabin in their path. As feeling returned to his fingers and toes, painful, burning feeling, Harold stood and began to explore more thoroughly. The cabin was larger than he'd first thought. The main room flowed into a kitchen, which was surprisingly well equipped. He opened cabinets and found canned goods, soup, beans, vegetables, dried pasta, rice in sealed containers, even coffee. Someone was living here, he called to Dorothy. Or preparing to. "This food isn't expired. I am May, with about to stime, is not to stime, is not to stime." He checked dates on the cans. Some were 2 years old, others just 1. The most recent, a can of tomato soup, expired in 6 months. Dorothy joined him in the kitchen, her color returning now that she was warm. She opened the refrigerator, empty and unplugged. She checked the pantry. More supplies. "There's enough food here for weeks," she said. But no photographs. No personal items. Nothing that says who lived here. They found the stairs and climbed to the 2nd floor. 3 bedrooms, each furnished simply but completely. Beds made up with blankets and pillows. Dressers with drawers that opened to reveal nothing, no clothes, no personal items. Nothing. It was like staying in a hotel room that had been furnished, but never occupied. The bathroom had a sink, toilet, and shower. Harold turned the faucet. Water came out. Ice cold, but clear. "There's a tank somewhere," he said. "Probably fed by a spring or well, propane water heater, but it's off. So we have shelter, heat, food, and water," Dorothy said, ticking off their resources. "We can survive here until the storm passes. Days if we have to." Harold agreed. They went back downstairs. The fire had warmed the main room considerably. Harold added another log, and Dorothy found candles in the kitchen, tall pillar candles that would burn for hours. They lit several and placed them around the room. The flickering light made the space feel almost cozy, like they were camping instead of stranded. "Should we try the phone again?" Dorothy asked. Harold checked. Still no signal. "We're probably in a valley. Mountains blocking everything. Once the storm clears, we can hike up to higher ground." They made soup from one of the cans, heating it on the propane stove. The smell of chicken noodle soup filled the cabin, homey and comforting. They ate slowly, sitting on the sofa near the fire, their bodies finally fully warm for the first time in hours. "This is strange," Dorothy said. "Not for the first time." "What part?" Harold asked. "The blizzard, the dead car, or the mysteriously furnished cabin?" "All of it," she said. "But especially this place. Someone built it. Someone maintained it. Someone stocked it with food and firewood. But they're not here, and they left no trace of themselves. Maybe they're planning to come back," Harold suggested. "Maybe," Dorothy said. But she didn't sound convinced. As darkness fell completely outside, not that they could tell through the whiteout, they explored more. Harold found a closet near the front door. Inside were winter coats, boots, gloves, all in different sizes, like the cabin was prepared for multiple people. But again, no names on anything, no labels, nothing personal. Dorothy found a bookshelf in what appeared to be a study off the main room. The books were varied novels, history, philosophy, some technical manuals about construction and wilderness survival. She pulled one out. Inside the cover, no name, just the printed title and author. "It's like whoever lived here wanted to be anonymous," she said. "Like they were hiding, or hiding something," Harold added quietly. That thought hung in the air between them, heavy and unsettling. They decided to sleep in shifts. Not because they expected danger, exactly, but because the situation felt wrong in ways they couldn't articulate. Dorothy took first watch, sitting in the armchair near the fire with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Harold lay on the sofa, exhausted but restless. He must have dozed eventually because he woke to Dorothy's hand on his shoulder. The fire had burned down to embers. The candles had guttered, and Dorothy was standing over him with a strange expression. "What?" he asked. Sitting up. "Listen," she said. He listened. At first, just the wind and the fire settling. Then he heard it, a sound from inside the cabin, a creak of wood, like someone stepping on an old floorboard, but not upstairs. "Below. Basement?" Harold whispered. Dorothy nodded. "I heard it twice now. Something's down there." Harold grabbed the flashlight and stood slowly. His ranger training kicked in awareness of his surroundings, where the exits were, what could be used as a weapon if needed. He picked up the iron poker from beside the fireplace. They moved through the darkened cabin toward the kitchen. Harold swept the flashlight slowly, checking corners. Nothing. Everything looked the same as before. Then he saw it, a door he'd somehow missed during their earlier exploration. It was tucked beside the pantry, painted the same color as the wall, easy to overlook. He approached it carefully. The door was closed but not locked. He could see light beneath it, not electric light, but the faint glow of something reflective, catching the beam of his flashlight through the crack. "Stay behind me," he told Dorothy. "Not a chance," she replied. After 51 years, he knew better than to argue. Harold opened the door slowly. Hinges creaked. Beyond it, stone steps descended into darkness. He aimed the flashlight down. The beam showed a large space, much larger than he'd expected. A finished basement with a concrete floor, clean and dry. They descended together, step by careful step. The basement was cold but not freezing. As they reached the bottom, Harold's flashlight swept the space and revealed a room that was clearly not just storage. There was a desk, large and solid oak, with papers stacked neatly on its surface. Filing cabinets lined one wall. Shelves held boxes, all labeled with dates and codes. And against the far wall, massive and impossible to miss, stood a safe. Not a little home safe. Not a gun cabinet. A vault. The kind of industrial safe you'd find in a bank or a museum. 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide, steel construction with a combination dial that gleamed in the flashlight beam. Dorothy moved past Harold toward the desk. She picked up one of the papers. "These are bills," she said. "Utility bills, property taxes, made out to Mountain Trust Holdings, LLC. A company owns this place," Harold said, moving closer to the safe. He ran his hand along the cold steel. "But who needs a safe like this in a cabin?" "Someone with something to protect," Dorothy said. She was opening filing cabinet drawers now. "These are maintenance records, repairs to the cabin, generator service, propane deliveries, all going back 20 years, 25. Harold examined the safe more closely. It was top of the line, or had been when it was installed. The combination dial was smooth, well maintained. There were no scratches, no signs of forced entry attempts. Whoever had put this here had known what they were doing. "Should we try to open it?" Dorothy asked. Harold turned to look at her. "It's not ours." "I know," she said. "But what if there's something in there that explains all this? What if someone needs what's inside?" 9. Or what if it's private? Harold countered. "What if we're looking at someone's valuables, and we have no right?" They stood in the basement, the flashlight beam making strange shadows on the walls, and faced the same question that had been building since they broke into the cabin. How far does survival justify trespassing? Where does necessity end and violation begin? "We don't have to decide tonight," Dorothy said finally. "Storm's still raging. We're not going anywhere. Let's get some rest. And in the morning, when our heads are clear, we can figure out what to do." Harold nodded. It was the sensible thing, the right thing. But as they climbed back up the stairs and closed the basement door behind them, he couldn't stop thinking about that safe. About what might be inside. About why someone would need that level of security. In a remote mountain cabin, they slept fitfully, taking turns keeping watch. The storm continued through the night, relentless and furious. Snow piled against the windows, wind shook the walls, and somewhere below them, in a basement they shouldn't have entered, a safe waited with answers to questions they hadn't yet learned to ask. Morning came grey and muted. The storm hadn't stopped, but it had weakened slightly. Harold stood at the window, staring out at a world buried in white. Their car was completely gone, just a bump in an endless landscape of snow. The road was invisible. They were truly stranded. Dorothy made coffee, real coffee from the supplies in the kitchen, and they sat at the dining table, not speaking for a while. Finally, Dorothy said what they'd both been thinking. "We should look at the safe," Harold asked. She nodded. "Not to steal, not to take anything, but to understand. This cabin, this place, someone went to a lot of trouble to keep it secret, keep it maintained, keep it ready. That safe in the basement is part of that story. And maybe, just maybe, whatever's inside is something that shouldn't stay hidden." Harold sipped his coffee. Dorothy was right. She usually was. They'd stumbled into something. And turning away now, pretending they hadn't seen it, felt wrong in a different way than looking felt wrong. "I worked in ranger stations for 40 years, Harold said slowly. "Had to open locked cabins, locked safes, sometimes when owners died or disappeared. It's not entirely outside my skill set." "I know," Dorothy said gently. "I'm not asking you to break the law. I'm asking you to make a judgment call. If whatever's in that safe is illegal, we report it. If it's innocent, we close it back up and never speak of it. But we need to know which." They finished their coffee in silence. Then, together, they went back down to the basement. In the grey morning light filtering through a small window, the safe looked even more imposing. Harold pulled the desk chair over and sat in front of it, studying the combination dial. This wasn't going to be like in movies where someone guessed random numbers and got lucky. But Harold had learned things during his career. Sometimes old safes had quirks, patterns left by frequent use. He examined the dial closely with his flashlight. There faint scratches near the dial, barely visible. Wear marks from the dial stopping in the same places over and over again. Someone had opened this safe regularly, and the dial had been turned to the same numbers so many times it had left traces. The marks were subtle, but Harold could see them. 3 stopping points, each worn slightly deeper than the surrounding metal. He estimated the positions. 23, 14, 9. "You see something?" Dorothy asked. "Maybe," Harold said. "Might be wear patterns. Might be nothing." He tried the numbers. 23 right, 14 left, 9 right. He pulled the handle. Nothing. He tried different orders, different directions. Nothing. 9, 23. 14. 14. 9. 23. Dorothy sat on the floor beside him, patient as always. She didn't rush him, didn't question, just waited while he worked through the possibilities. On the 8th attempt, 9 right, 23 left, 14 right, something deep inside the safe clicked. Heavy tumblers falling into place. The sound of a lock surrendering. Harold and Dorothy looked at each other. This was the moment. Once they opened it, they couldn't unsee what was inside, couldn't unknow what they learned. The choice to look was also a choice to act on whatever they found. "Together," Dorothy said, standing and placing her hand on the handle next to his. They both gripped the cold steel and pulled. The vault door swung open with a smooth, well-oiled whisper that spoke of recent maintenance, of care taken even in abandonment. And inside, stacked floor to ceiling in neat, organized rows, was more money than either of them had ever seen outside of a movie. More money than they'd ever imagined seeing in real life. Bundles and bundles of $100 bills, each wrapped with paper bands, packed so tightly that the safe was completely full. Dorothy made a small sound, not quite a gasp, something softer, more shocked. Harold couldn't speak at all. His mind tried to process what he was seeing, and failed. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. Yet here it was, solid and undeniable. With shaking hands, Harold reached in and pulled out one bundle. The band read, $10,000 in neat printing. He pulled out another. Same. Another. Same. His eyes swept the safe, trying to count the rows, the stacks, doing impossible math. How much? Dorothy whispered. I don't know, Harold said, his voice hoarse. Millions. Tens of millions. Maybe. He couldn't finish. Because behind the first layer of money, he could see other things. Waterproof document cases, ledgers with leather bindings, and something that made his blood run cold, a laptop computer, carefully wrapped in plastic. This wasn't just money hidden in a safe. This was a fortune, hidden with intention, with documentation, with evidence. And Harold and Dorothy, two elderly people who'd only wanted to drive home from their daughter's house, were standing in front of it with no idea what it meant or what they should do. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, trapping them in this cabin with a secret that someone had kept for decades. A secret that, now discovered, would change everything. Harold set the bundle of money down carefully, as if it might explode. Dorothy reached past him and pulled out one of the document cases. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, the kind accountants used before computers. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat, precise. Dates, amounts, account numbers. Each line a transaction, each number larger than most people saw in a lifetime. And at the top of the first page, written in the same careful hand, Pension Fund Consolidation, Alpha 7-2. Untraceable. Dorothy looked up at Harold, her eyes wide. Oh, God, she breathed. Harold, I think this is stolen money. And in that moment, everything changed. Harold set the bundle of money down on the desk with trembling hands. The paper band around it read $10,000 in neat black printing. He stared at it like it might transform into something else if he looked away and looked back. But it remained stubbornly real, a stack of $100 bills thick as a paperback novel. Dorothy had already opened the leather-bound ledger across her lap. Her finger traced down the first page, moving from line to line, her lips moving silently as she read. The color had drained from her face. Harold, she said quietly, you need to see this. He moved to stand behind her, looking over her shoulder at the neat columns of handwriting. Each entry had a date, an amount, and a cryptic code, but it was the notes in the margins that told the real story. January 15th, 1991. Consolidated Retirement Account, RT 447. Amount transferred, $123,000. Source, Matheson Pension Fund. Status, clean transfer, no audit trail. March 3rd, 1991. Municipal bonds liquidated. Amount, $247,000. Source, Denver Public Works Retirement Account. Status, untraceable. July 19, 1991. Private accounts merged. Amount, $98,000. Source, Grant Family Trust. Status, documentation destroyed. Line after line, page after page. The ledger went on for what looked like 200 pages, each one filled with the same careful documentation of theft. Harold pulled out his phone and took a photograph of the page. Then another. Then another. His ranger training was kicking in now. Document everything. Preserve evidence. Maintain chain of custody even when you're not sure what the custody is for yet. There are more ledgers, Dorothy said, pointing to the safe. Behind the first layer of money, Harold could see at least 5 more leather-bound books, each as thick as the first. He pulled them out one by one and stacked them on the desk. Dorothy opened the second ledger. More of the same. Dates stretching from 1991 through 1995. Amounts that made Harold's head spin. 50,000 here, 200,000 there. Sometimes $500,000 in a single entry. The third ledger was different. This one had names, real names, not account numbers or codes, but actual people. Roger Matheson, age 67, retired postal worker. Amount lost, $73,000. Life savings. Helen Grant, age 72, widow. Amount lost, $89,000. Husband's pension. David and Patricia Torres, ages 64 and 62. Amount lost, $112,000. Combined retirement accounts. Dorothy's hand covered her mouth. These are real people. Real families. Someone stole everything from them. Harold kept flipping pages. The names went on and on. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Each entry showed a name, an age, what they'd lost, what it represented. Retirement funds. Pension accounts. Life savings. College funds for grandchildren. Money set aside for medical emergencies. How many names? Dorothy asked. Her voice barely a whisper. Harold flipped to the last page of the ledger. At the bottom, someone had written in neat script, total victims documented, 473. Total amount misappropriated, approximately $43 million as of December 1991. 43 million, Harold repeated. But there's way more than that in the safe. He turned back to the safe and began pulling out more document cases. Inside one, he found newspaper clippings, yellowed with age and carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. The first headline made his stomach drop. Prominent Denver financial advisor vanishes, millions missing. The article was dated January 7, 1992, from the Denver Post. Harold read it aloud, his voice shaking slightly. Marcus Trent, a respected wealth management advisor who handled retirement accounts for hundreds of Denver area clients, disappeared sometime over the New Year's weekend. Authorities discovered that approximately $43 million in client funds are missing. The FBI believes Trent fled the country after liquidating accounts under his management over the past 18 months. Most of the victims are elderly retirees who trusted Trent with their life savings. This is one of the most devastating financial crimes we've seen, said FBI Special Agent Lawrence Cooper. These people worked their entire lives. And now, they have nothing. 1,000. Dorothy had moved to sit in the desk chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. Marcus Trent, she repeated. This was his cabin. Harold found another clipping. Trent investigation goes cold after 5 years. Another one. Victims of Trent scandal still seeking justice 10 years later. And another. Denver embezzlement case remains unsolved after 20 years. He got away with it, Dorothy said bitterly. He stole from hundreds of people and disappeared, and no one ever found him. Until now, Harold said quietly. He was pulling out more document cases. Inside one, he found passport photos the same man photographed under different names. In one photo, he was Marcus Trent, clean-shaven with dark hair. In another, he had a beard and was called Michael Thompson. In a third, he'd gone gray and was listed as Martin Trask. Multiple identities, Harold said. He was planning to disappear even before he took the money. Another case held property deeds. The cabin they were standing in was registered to Mountain Trust Holdings, LLC, purchased in 1987, 4 years before the theft. Trent had been planning this for years, setting up his escape route, creating a place where he could hide in plain sight. Dorothy found something else, a letter, typed on old-fashioned paper, dated December 20th, 2021, just 3 years ago. She read it aloud, her voice tight with anger. "If you're reading this, then something has happened to me. This money represents my life's work, liberation from a system that steals from everyone legally, through taxes, inflation, and economic manipulation. I took it illegally. Yes, but I took it from people who could afford to lose it. They had pensions, social security, family support. The names in the red ledger, those are my mistakes. People who invested more than they should have, who put all their eggs in one basket. If circumstances allow, consider compensating them. But understand that the bulk of this fortune is mine by right of daring, by right of intelligence, by right of seeing an opportunity and having the courage to take it. Use it wisely. Live boldly. Don't let guilt or conventional morality bind you." Signed, M.T. The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Harold found himself clenching his fists, anger building in his chest like pressure. This man, this Marcus Trent, had stolen from elderly people, destroyed lives, and had the audacity to call it courage, had the twisted logic to claim his victims could afford it. As if anyone could afford to lose everything they'd worked for. "Right of daring," Dorothy said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "He calls ruining 473 lives daring." Harold turned back to the safe. Behind all the documents, past all the ledgers, the money remained. Stacks and stacks of it, packed so tightly he couldn't see the back wall. He started pulling out bundles, setting them on the desk, counting. 10,000 per bundle, 10 bundles per row, 20 rows deep in some sections. His mind did math he didn't want to do. "There's got to be over 200 million here," he said. "Maybe closer to 300. Dorothy had found another document, a handwritten note dated just 3 years ago, in the same neat script as the ledgers. Current holdings summary. Cash on hand, $267 million. Additional assets in offshore accounts, approximately $43 million. Properties under various LLC names, estimated value $12 million. Total net worth $322 million. $322 million, Harold repeated numbly. He turned $43 million in stolen money into $322 million. By investing it, Dorothy said, finding more documents. Stock purchases, real estate, bonds. He spent 30 years growing the fortune he stole. She found more papers, death records, medical reports. Marcus Trent had died in this very cabin 3 years ago. Heart attack. Alone. With no one to call for help. His body had been found months later by a hunting party who'd stumbled on the cabin by chance. By then, he'd been dead so long that identification was difficult. He'd been buried in an unmarked grave in the county cemetery, listed as an unknown vagrant. No one knew who he was, Harold said, reading the reports. He died with all this money, all these secrets, and no one had any idea, until the county sold the property for unpaid taxes. Dorothy added. She'd found more paperwork. When no one claimed the cabin or paid the property taxes, it was supposed to be auctioned off. But something went wrong with the paperwork. And it just sat here, forgotten. They stood in the basement, surrounded by evidence of one of the biggest unsolved financial crimes in Colorado history. The safe door hung open like a mouth, still full of cash. The desk was covered with ledgers, newspaper clippings, and the documented devastation of hundreds of lives. Harold's phone buzzed suddenly, making them both jump. He pulled it out, one bar of signal, flickering in and out. A text message from Sarah had somehow gotten through. "Are you okay? News says blizzard is worst in 20 years. Please respond when you can." He typed back quickly. "We're safe. Stranded in a cabin. We'll call when storm clears. Don't worry." The message failed to send once, twice, then finally went through as the signal flickered back. Dorothy had returned to the red ledger, the one with all the victims' names. She was reading them slowly, running her finger down each page. "Harold," she said, "look at this one." He moved to her side. She was pointing to an entry dated May 1991. Bernard and Louise Mitchell, ages 69 and 67. Amount lost, $48,000. Bernard's railroad pension. Harold's blood went cold. "Mitchell, like us. Could be coincidence," Dorothy said. "It's a common name." But Harold was already pulling out his phone, searching through old family records he'd digitized years ago. His father's brother, Bernard, had moved to Denver in the 80s, worked for the railroad, died in. Harold's heart sank. Died in 1995. "Uncle Bernard," Harold said quietly. "I didn't know him well. He and Dad weren't close. But I remember hearing he'd lost everything near the end. That he and Aunt Louise spent their final years struggling. I thought it was just bad luck. Bad investments." "It wasn't bad luck," Dorothy said softly. "It was Marcus Trent." They sat down on the cold basement floor, the weight of discovery pressing down on them. This wasn't just an abstract crime anymore. This was family. This was personal. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Harold stood up slowly, his knees protesting. He walked to the safe and stared at the money stacks and stacks of $100 bills that represented so much more than currency. They represented Harold's uncle dying in poverty. They represented Dorothy's teaching colleague, who'd had to work until she was 80 because her retirement fund had vanished. They represented the thousands of small tragedies that happened when one person decided his greed mattered more than other people's lives. "We could take it," Harold said suddenly. Dorothy looked up at him, surprised. "I'm serious," he continued. "No one knows we're here. The storm will eventually clear. We could pack up this money, lock the safe, and leave. Come back with a truck when the roads are passable. Take it all. No one would ever know." Dorothy stood and walked to his side. "You don't mean that, don't I?" Harold turned to face her. "Think about it, Dorothy. When did we last have money that wasn't spoken for? When did we last look at our bank account and not feel that knot in our stomach? That's not who we are," Dorothy said gently. "Maybe it should be," Harold said, his voice rising slightly. "Maybe we've been fools our whole lives, following rules that only work for people who already have money, working honest jobs that barely paid enough, saving pennies while people like Marcus Trent stole millions." He was breathing hard now, surprised by his own anger. Dorothy took his hand. "Tell me about your mother," she said quietly. Harold blinked, thrown by the change in direction. "What? Your mother? When she got sick? Tell me about that." Harold's jaw tightened. You know what happened. Tell me anyway, Dorothy insisted. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then the words came. 1998. She was 71. Cancer. Stage 4. The doctors said there was an experimental treatment, but insurance wouldn't cover it. Said it wasn't proven effective enough. How much did they want? Dorothy asked, though she knew the answer. $50,000. Harold said. We didn't have it. We took out a second mortgage on the house, borrowed from my brother. Sold Mum's car, our second car, everything we could, scraped together the money over 3 months. And, Dorothy prompted gently, and she died anyway, Harold said, his voice cracking. 6 months later. The treatment didn't work, or we got it too late, or maybe it was never going to work. But we spent the next 12 years paying off that debt. 12 years of every extra dollar going to pay for 6 months of hope. Dorothy squeezed his hand. And Sarah, when she needed surgery. Harold closed his eyes. 2007. Emma was 8. Appendix burst. Emergency surgery. Even with insurance, it was $28,000. We were still paying off Mom's medical bills. We couldn't help. Had to watch our daughter struggle, take on debt, work extra shifts while her daughter recovered. We couldn't do anything. And your truck, Dorothy continued. The one you loved, sold it, Harold said. 2012. Transmission died. Cost more to fix than it was worth. Couldn't afford a decent replacement. So I bought that old Ranger that breaks down every other month. Still driving it. And the cabin at Twin Lakes, Dorothy said. Harold's shoulders sagged. The cabin? Yeah. My dad left it to me. My brother wanted to keep it in the family, but I couldn't afford the property taxes. We sold it for less than it was worth just to get out from under it. Someone else's family makes memories there now. 7 people are. Dorothy let the silence stretch between them. Then she spoke, her voice steady but thick with emotion. My turn. Remember when my dad died? 2004. Harold nodded. Nursing home bills, Dorothy said. Medicaid didn't cover half of what he needed. He had dementia, needed specialized care. My sister and I split the costs. $36,000 each over 3 years. I took a part-time job grading papers at night, remember? Just to keep up with the payments. I remember, Harold said, and when we wanted to help Sarah with her wedding, 2006, Harold said, we'd saved $4,000. It wasn't enough for what she wanted, but it was something. Except the water heater died that winter, Dorothy continued. $2,200 we didn't have. So Sarah got $2,000 for her wedding instead of $4,000. She never complained, but I saw her face when she was looking at venues she couldn't afford. They stood side by side. Decades of financial struggle laid bare between them. Every sacrifice, every choice made not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Every time they'd smiled and said it was fine when it wasn't fine at all. We're not rich people, Harold said quietly. We never have been. We worked hard our whole lives, and we have a paid-off house and $23,000 in savings to show for it. That's it. That's our legacy. And our character, Dorothy added. That's our legacy too. Character doesn't pay for cancer treatments, Harold said bitterly. Character doesn't help our granddaughter pay for college. Emma's taking out student loans. Dorothy, $80,000 in debt before she even starts her career. We could help her. With this money, we could eliminate her debt. We could set up funds for Michael and Sophie. We could actually retire instead of me doing handyman jobs at 73. We could, Dorothy agreed. But Harold, look at where that money came from. She gestured to the red ledger. These people, they had the same struggles we had. Probably worse. And someone took everything from them, left them with nothing. Some of them died in poverty because Marcus Trent decided he deserved their money more than they did. Harold picked up one of the money bundles, feeling its weight, but they're not getting it back either way. The crime happened 30 years ago. Most of these people are probably dead. The ones who aren't have already lost everything, already rebuilt their lives, or failed to. This money sitting in a safe doesn't help them. But taking it makes us thieves, Dorothy said quietly. Different kind of thieves than Trent, maybe, but thieves nonetheless. 1910. Die. Is it stealing if we're taking from a thief? Yes, Dorothy said firmly. It's still stealing. And more than that, it's becoming the thing we've hated our whole lives. Becoming people who justify taking what isn't theirs because they need it more, because they deserve it more, because the system is unfair anyway. That's exactly what Trent told himself. And it turned him into a monster who died alone in a cabin with $300 million, and not a single person who mourned him. Harold set the money down. His hands were shaking. I don't want to be poor anymore, Dorothy. I'm tired. I'm 73 years old, and I'm tired of worrying about money. Tired of choosing between groceries and medication. Tired of watching our family struggle when we could help if we just had something to give. Dorothy moved in front of him and took his face in her hands. Look at me, she said. When he met her eyes, she continued, we have been poor. We've struggled. We've made sacrifices that hurt. But we've never been thieves. We've never taken what wasn't ours. And we've never looked at human suffering and decided we deserved to profit from it. But no one would know, Harold said, his voice breaking. We would know, Dorothy said. Every time we looked at each other, every time we bought something with that money, every time we helped Sarah or the grandkids, we'd know it came from someone else's destroyed retirement, someone else's stolen pension, maybe even your Uncle Bernard's stolen pension. Harold pulled away and walked to the far side of the basement. He stared at the wall, his back to Dorothy, shoulders shaking. She heard him crying and gave him the space to do it. After a few minutes, he wiped his eyes and turned back. You're right, he said hoarsely. Of course you're right. But God, Dorothy, it hurts to do the right thing sometimes. It hurts so much. I know, she said, going to him. They held each other in the basement of a dead thief's cabin, surrounded by stolen fortune, and let themselves feel the full weight of a lifetime of honorable poverty. Eventually they pulled apart. Harold walked back to the desk and picked up the red ledger. These people, he said, the ones who lost everything, they deserve to know justice finally came. They deserve their money back, if it's possible. Even if it means we get nothing? Dorothy asked. Even then, Harold confirmed. We report this, all of it. We let the authorities handle it. And whatever happens after that, at least we'll know we did right. Dorothy nodded. When? Once the storm clears, Harold said. Once we can get a signal strong enough to call the FBI. But for now, we document everything. They spent the next several hours photographing every page of every ledger, every newspaper article, every document in the safe. Harold's phone storage filled up. So, they started using Dorothy's phone too. They catalogued the money as best they could without removing all of it, estimating based on bundle size and how many bundles they could see. Dorothy found a notebook in the desk and started handwriting a summary. Date found, location, estimated amount, condition of everything, their actions since entering the cabin, creating a record that couldn't be questioned later. Outside, the storm began to weaken. The wind that had been howling for nearly 24 hours dropped to a steady blow. The snow still fell, but lighter now, not the blinding whiteout that had trapped them. It's clearing, Harold observed, looking out the small basement window. Tomorrow, maybe, Dorothy said, we'll be able to hike out, find help, make our report. They both knew what that meant. Once they reported this discovery, their lives would change. The media would find out. Reporters would want interviews. The FBI would have questions. Their faces would be everywhere. And everyone would know they'd found a fortune and turned it in. Some people would call them heroes. Others would call them fools. Are you sure? Harold asked one final time. Once we make that call, we can't take it back. Dorothy looked around at the basement, at the open safe full of cash, at the ledgers documenting so much pain. I'm sure, she said. This isn't ours. It never was, and I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and corrupted. Harold nodded slowly. Then we sleep on it one more night. Make sure we're thinking clearly. And in the morning, we do what we know is right. They went back upstairs and made dinner from the canned supplies, beans and rice. Simple but warm. They sat by the fire and didn't talk much. Both were exhausted. Physically from the ordeal of survival, and emotionally from the decision they'd made. That night, Harold couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Emma's student loans, about Michael needing a car to get to his after-school job, about Sophie growing up in a world that seemed to get more expensive every year. He thought about Dorothy's arthritis that would only get worse, and the treatments she'd need that insurance might not cover. He thought about the furnace in their house that was 30 years old and would need replacing soon, and he thought about the money in the basement. $267 million that could solve every problem he'd ever worried about. But then he thought about Roger Matheson, retired postal worker, who'd lost $73,000. He thought about Helen Grant, widow, who'd lost her husband's entire pension. He thought about Uncle Bernard, who died thinking he'd made bad investments, when really he'd been robbed, and Harold knew, bone deep, that Dorothy was right. Some things mattered more than money. Character, integrity, being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know you'd done right even when it hurt. Around 3 in the morning, he got up and went down to the basement one last time. He stood in front of the open safe, staring at the fortune inside. Then, carefully, he began closing it. He put the documents back in their cases. He restacked the money bundles. He returned the ledgers to their positions. When everything was back as they'd found it, except for the photographs on their phones, documenting it all, he closed the vault door. It shut with a heavy, final sound. He spun the combination dial, relocking the safe. Dorothy appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wrapped in a blanket. Couldn't sleep either. No, Harold admitted. But I'm done now. I've made peace with it. She came to stand beside him. No regrets? 1,000,000 regrets, he said honestly. But none about this. About doing right. Not about doing right. Good, she said. Because neither do I. They went back upstairs together. The storm had finally stopped. Through the windows, they could see the first pale hints of dawn touching the snow-covered mountains. The world outside was buried but beautiful, clean, and new in the way only fresh snow can make things look. Tomorrow we report it, Harold said. Tomorrow we report it. Dorothy agreed. They held hands in the quiet cabin, two elderly people who'd found a fortune and chosen to give it up. Who'd looked at the easiest choice and made the hardest one instead. Who'd remembered that character isn't what you do when everyone is watching. It's what you do when no one would ever know. And in that moment, broke but unbowed, they had never been richer. Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountains. Harold stood at the cabin window, watching sunlight turn the snow-covered landscape into something that looked almost peaceful. Almost. Behind him, Dorothy made coffee, the familiar smell filling the cabin with a normalcy that felt surreal given what they'd discovered in the basement. Harold's phone showed 3 bars of signal now that the storm had passed. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the numbers, heart pounding harder than it should, for a man just making a phone call. "You ready?" Dorothy asked, appearing beside him with 2 mugs of coffee. "No," Harold admitted. "But that's never stopped us before." He dialed the number for the FBI's Denver field office. The phone rang twice before a receptionist answered. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Denver office. "How may I direct your call?" Harold cleared his throat. "I need to report a discovery. A significant discovery related to an unsolved case." "What type of case, sir?" "Financial crime," Harold said. "The Marcus Trent embezzlement case from 1992. There was a pause. "Sir, that case is over 30 years old. Are you saying you have information?" So, I'm saying I've found the money," Harold said. "All of it. $267 million in cash, plus documentation, ledgers, everything. I'm at the cabin where he hid it." Another pause. Longer this time. "Sir, I'm going to need your name and location, and I need to transfer you to our Financial Crimes Division." Over the next 20 minutes, Harold was transferred 3 times, each time explaining what they'd found, where they were, how they'd discovered it. Each person sounded more skeptical than the last, until he mentioned specific details from the ledgers, victim names, account numbers, dates that only someone who'd actually seen the documents would know. Finally, he was connected to Special Agent Sarah Winters, who led the Cold Case Division. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice sharp and professional. "I've been briefed on your call. Before we proceed, I need to know, have you removed anything from the location? Any money, documents, or evidence?" "No, ma'am," Harold said. "We photographed everything for documentation, but we haven't taken anything. The safe is locked again. Everything is as we found it." "And you said you're still at the location?" "You haven't left? We're snowed in," Harold explained. "Our car is buried. We broke into the cabin to survive the blizzard. We only found the basement and the safe because we were stranded here." Agent Winters was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Mitchell, if what you're saying is true, you've potentially discovered evidence in one of the largest unsolved financial crimes in Colorado history. I'm going to need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't touch anything else. Don't let anyone else into the cabin. We're sending agents to your location immediately." "How long?" Harold asked. "Given the weather and road conditions, probably 3 to 4 hours. Can you hold out that long?" Harold looked around the cabin at the fireplace, the stocked kitchen, the comfortable furniture. "We'll be fine. We have food, heat, everything we need." "Good. And Mr. Mitchell, thank you for calling this in. Most people wouldn't have." After he hung up, Dorothy said quietly, "Most people wouldn't have." That's what she said. "I know," Harold replied. "Which means most people would have taken the money." "I know," Harold said again. They sat in silence, both thinking the same thing. They'd just set in motion something that couldn't be stopped. In a few hours, federal agents would arrive. Then investigators, forensic accountants, media. Their names would become public. Their choice to report, rather than take, would be scrutinized, judged, questioned. Their lives would never be the same. Second thoughts? Dorothy asked. About 1,000, Harold admitted. But not about this. Never about this. The helicopters arrived 3 hours and 47 minutes later. Harold heard them first, the rhythmic thump of rotors cutting through mountain air. He and Dorothy went to the window and watched 2 black helicopters circle once, before landing in a clearing about 100 yards from the cabin. Agents emerged, 6 of them, dressed in dark tactical gear, trudging through waist-deep snow toward the cabin. Harold opened the door before they could knock. The lead agent was exactly who he'd spoken to on the phone, Special Agent Sarah Winters. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and the kind of presence that commanded rooms without trying. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," she said, showing her credentials. "I'm Agent Winters. Thank you for waiting. Come in," Harold said, stepping aside. The agents filed in, stamping snow from their boots. Sarah looked around the cabin, taking in details the furniture, the stocked kitchen, the signs of recent habitation. "You said you broke in?" she asked. "Door was locked," Harold confirmed. "We were freezing. Car died on the road. It was break in or die outside." "Understandable," Sarah said. "Show me what you found." Harold led them to the basement. When he opened the door and they descended the stairs, Sarah stopped short at the sight of the massive safe. "Jesus," she breathed. Then, to her team, "Get forensics up here. Document everything. And call Denver. Tell them the Trent case just went active again." Harold showed her the combination he'd discovered, and she had one of her team members open the safe. When the door swung wide and revealed the stacks of money, every agent in the room went silent. "How much?" Sarah asked quietly. "Based on what we could see and count," Dorothy said. "Approximately $267 million in cash, plus these." She showed them the document cases, the ledgers, the newspaper clippings. Sarah pulled out the red ledger, carefully, using gloved hands. She opened it to the first page and read. Her jaw tightened. Victim names, 473 of them. "Most are elderly," Harold said. "Or were elderly. This happened 30 years ago. Some of them are probably deceased by now. But some aren't," Sarah said. She looked at Harold and Dorothy with something close to awe. "You know what you just did? You potentially solved one of the biggest cold cases in FBI history. And you gave hundreds of people a chance at restitution they thought they'd never see. We just did what anyone should do," Dorothy said quietly. "But most wouldn't," Sarah replied. "Trust me. Most people find this much money. They find a way to convince themselves they deserve it." Over the next several hours, the cabin transformed into a crime scene. More agents arrived. Photographers documented every inch of the basement. Forensic accountants began the meticulous process of cataloging the money, counting every bundle, recording every serial number they could. Harold and Dorothy were interviewed separately, each giving detailed statements about how they'd found the cabin, discovered the basement, opened the safe. Sarah was thorough but kind, asking the same questions multiple ways, building a record that would hold up in court. "One last question," she said to Harold. "At any point, did you consider keeping the money?" Harold looked her in the eye. "Yes," he said honestly. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. We're not wealthy people. We've struggled financially our whole lives. So yes, the thought crossed my mind. But you didn't act on it. No, ma'am. Because it wasn't ours. No matter how much we needed it, taking it would have made us thieves. Different kind of thieves than Marcus Trent maybe, but thieves all the same. Sarah nodded slowly. That's rare. More rare than you know. By late afternoon, the agents had finished the initial documentation. The money was being loaded into secure transport containers. The ledgers and documents were being carefully packed as evidence. Sarah told Harold and Dorothy they were free to leave. One of the helicopters would take them home. What happens now? Dorothy asked. Now we investigate, Sarah said. We'll verify everything in those ledgers. Track down the victims or their surviving family members. Set up a restitution fund. It'll take months, maybe years, to sort through all of it. But because of what you did, it's finally possible. Will our names stay private? Harold asked. Sarah hesitated. I'll do my best to keep you out of the official reports as long as possible. But realistically, something this big, it's going to leak. Reporters will find out. Your names will probably become public. How public? Dorothy asked. National news public, Sarah admitted. This is a major story. Elderly couple finds massive fortune in hidden cabin, turns it all in. The media is going to love it. Some people will call you heroes. Others. Some. Others will call us fools. Harold finished. Probably, Sarah said gently. I'm sorry, but you should prepare yourselves. Your lives are about to get complicated. The helicopter ride home was surreal. Harold and Dorothy sat side by side, headphones on to muffle the rotor noise, watching the mountains slip past beneath them. Neither spoke. There was too much to process, too much that had changed in less than 48 hours. When they landed at a small airport outside Cedar Springs, Sarah's words proved prophetic faster than they'd imagined. News vans were already there. Someone had leaked it, probably a local who'd seen the helicopters. Maybe a federal employee who couldn't resist telling a friend who told a reporter. Cameras and microphones appeared the moment they stepped off the helicopter. Reporters shouted questions. Mr. Mitchell, is it true you found over $200 million? Mrs. Mitchell, why didn't you keep the money? Are you regretting your decision? FBI agents hustled them into a waiting car. But the damage was done. By the time they reached their small house in Cedar Springs, their faces were already on the news. Local stations first, then regional, then national. By evening, they were trending on social media. The reactions split sharply and viciously. Some praised them. These are real heroes. Integrity over greed. Others mocked them. Two idiots just gave away a fortune. Could have changed their entire family's life. Still, others attacked. They're lying. Nobody turns in that much money. This is a publicity stunt. Harold and Dorothy unplugged their landline after the 50th call from reporters. They turned off their phones after the 100th text message, from people they hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly eager to reconnect. Their daughter Sarah drove up from Denver that evening, her face tight with worry. Mom, Dad, are you okay? The news made it sound like you were in danger. We were, Dorothy said. But we're not anymore. We're safe. We're fine. And the money? Sarah asked carefully, sitting at the kitchen table with them. What they're saying on the news. Is it true? $267 million. It's true, Harold confirmed. We found it all. And we reported it all. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. That report. That. You don't have to say anything, Dorothy said, taking her daughter's hand. We did what we had to do, what we were raised to do. Most people are saying you should have kept it, Sarah said quietly. That you deserved it, that you've struggled enough. Most people are wrong, Harold said firmly. That money was stolen from hundreds of families who struggled just like we did. Taking it would have made us part of the crime, not separate from it. The support lasted 3 days. Then the tide turned. An investigative reporter discovered that Harold's uncle had been one of Trent's victims. Suddenly the narrative changed. Couple had personal stake in Trent case, but claims they only wanted justice. Unquote. Op-eds appeared questioning their motives. Radio talk show hosts debated whether they'd really been noble or just scared of getting caught. Online forums dissected every detail of their financial history. Their modest house, their old car, suggesting they were too poor to have been smart enough to keep the money hidden. The cruelest comments came from people who'd also struggled financially. I've been poor my whole life, and I would have taken that money in a heartbeat. These people are either lying or stupid. Harold stopped reading the news after a week. Dorothy lasted 2 days longer, before she too turned away from the constant judgment, the endless speculation, the voices of strangers who thought they knew better. But some voices weren't strangers. Some were victims, and those voices started reaching out. The first letter arrived 6 days after their names became public. It was handwritten on paper that had yellowed with time, the handwriting shaky but determined. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, my name is Margaret Patterson. In 1991, my husband Robert gave our entire retirement savings to Marcus Trent to manage. We lost $82,000. Robert died in 2003, never knowing justice would come, but I'm still here. And what you did, turning in that money when you could have kept it, that means everything to me. You gave me back something I thought was lost forever. Faith that good people still exist. Thank you. With deepest gratitude, Margaret Patterson, Dorothy cried, reading it. More letters came, then phone calls. Then the FBI organized a meeting in Denver for victims who wanted to meet Harold and Dorothy in person. 23 people showed up. Most were elderly, some using walkers or wheelchairs. A few were younger children or grandchildren of victims who'd passed away. They gathered in a conference room at the FBI field office, and Sarah Winters introduced Harold and Dorothy. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. These people, strangers who'd been robbed 30 years ago, stood and clapped until their hands must have hurt. Harold saw tears on weathered faces. Dorothy saw gratitude so raw, it felt sacred. One by one, they shared their stories. Margaret Patterson, the woman who'd written the first letter, spoke about her husband Robert dying ashamed, thinking he'd made bad investments. You gave me the gift of knowing he wasn't foolish. He was robbed. And now maybe I'll get something back. But more than money, you gave me closure. Thomas Brennan, 79 years old, spoke about losing his parents' money. I was supposed to take care of their retirement fund. Instead, I gave it to Trent, and he took everything. My parents spent their final years struggling because of my choice. They died thinking I'd failed them. But I didn't fail. I was robbed, and you proved that. A younger woman named Jennifer Martinez spoke for her deceased grandmother. She died 10 years ago, broke and bitter. But before she passed, she told me to never trust anyone with money. To never believe in human goodness because it would only disappoint me. You proved her wrong. I wish she'd lived to see it." Harold sat listening, overwhelmed. Dorothy held his hand so tightly her knuckles went white. These weren't abstract victims from a ledger. They were real people whose lives had been shattered by one man's greed. And somehow, impossibly, Harold and Dorothy's choice to do right had given them something back. After the meeting, as they were leaving, an older man approached. He was thin, using a cane, maybe 85 years old. "Mr. Mitchell," he said quietly, "I'm Richard Palmer. I lost $73,000 to Trent in 1991. Everything I'd saved working construction for 40 years. I'm sorry," Harold said. "That must have been devastating." "It was," Richard agreed. "But that's not why I wanted to talk to you. What I wanted to say was, thank you for the other thing, for not taking it, for showing the world that some people still have integrity." His eyes were wet. "I'd started to think maybe Trent was right. Maybe everyone is just out for themselves. But you proved different." He shook Harold's hand, then Dorothy's. "You gave me back more than money could buy. You gave me back faith." After he walked away, Dorothy turned to Harold, with tears streaming down her face. "Did we do that? Did we really give people faith?" "Some people," Harold said, his own voice thick. "But not everyone saw them as heroes." The death threats started a week after their names went public. First it was emails. "You're idiots who gave away a fortune. You deserve whatever poverty you get." Then it escalated. "Someone should teach you what happens to people who waste opportunities." The FBI took the threats seriously. 2 agents were assigned to monitor their house. Sarah Winters called personally to check on them every few days. "We're tracking the sources," she assured them. "Most are just angry people venting, but some are serious." Harold finished. "Some might be connected to Trent," Sarah admitted. "We're investigating whether he had partners who helped him hide the money. People who might not want that fortune going back to its rightful owners." 2 weeks after going public, someone posted their home address online. Then their phone numbers. Then detailed information about their daughter and grandchildren, complete with photos and where they lived. "This is called doxing," Sarah explained during an emergency call. "People who want to harass or intimidate you by sharing personal information. We're working to get it taken down, but once it's out there, it spreads." Dorothy finished. She sounded tired, more tired than Harold had heard in years. That night, after Sarah's call, they sat in their living room with the curtains drawn and security alarms armed. "We could leave," Harold said quietly. "The FBI offered to relocate us temporarily until things calm down." "Where would we go?" Dorothy asked. "This is our home. These are our memories. Running away doesn't change what we did or what people think about it, but it might keep us safe," Harold argued. Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm not afraid of people who send threats from behind computer screens. I'm afraid of becoming people who regret doing the right thing because it got difficult." "It's more than difficult," Harold said. "It's dangerous." "So was that blizzard," Dorothy countered. "So was walking into the unknown to find shelter. We survived that. We'll survive this." The legal complexities began unfolding 3 weeks after their discovery. The FBI's investigation had confirmed everything in Trent's ledgers. The money was definitely stolen. The victims were real. But now came the hard questions. Who legally owned the money? How should it be distributed? What about victims who died? What about Harold and Dorothy? Agent Winters explained it during one of her visits. The U.S. Attorney's Office is setting up a restitution fund. The $267 million in cash will be the foundation. We're also tracking other assets Trent had offshore accounts. Properties under shell company names could end up being over $300 million total. What about the victims? Dorothy asked. How much will they get back? One. And quoted to stay. That's being calculated, Sarah said. It's complicated. Some people lost more than others. Some victims are deceased, and we have to determine next of kin. Some amounts don't match exactly because interest wasn't paid over 30 years. It's going to take time, but they'll get something? Harold pressed. Most of them, yes, Sarah confirmed. It won't be everything they lost, but it'll be substantial. Because of you. Then she pulled out a folder. But there's something else you need to know. Something about you specifically. Harold and Dorothy exchanged glances. There's a federal law, Sarah continued, about rewards for finding stolen property. If someone locates and reports significant stolen assets, they can be entitled to a percentage of what's recovered. It's designed to encourage people to do exactly what you did, turn in found money instead of keeping it. We don't want a reward, Harold said immediately. We did what anyone should do. I understand, Sarah said gently. But this isn't about wanting it. It's about the law recognizing what you did. You found evidence that solved a 33-year-old cold case. You could have taken all of it and disappeared. You didn't. The law says you're entitled to compensation. How much? Dorothy asked quietly. Sarah opened the folder and pulled out a document. The standard is between 10 and 25%, depending on circumstances. Given the amount recovered, the significance of the case, the fact that you made restitution possible for hundreds of victims, and your exemplary conduct throughout. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. The U.S. Attorney is recommending 20%. Harold felt his heart stop. 20% of $267 million. He did the math and felt dizzy. That's $53.4 million, Sarah finished. Before taxes, obviously. But yes, that's what they're proposing. The room went silent. Dorothy's hand found Harold's. They sat there. Two people who'd spent a lifetime scraping by, being told they'd just become multimillionaires for doing what they'd been raised to believe was simply right. We can't, Dorothy said finally. That money should go to the victims. It's not coming from the victims, Sarah explained. The law requires the government to pay rewards separately. It doesn't reduce what the victims receive. They get their restitution. You get your reward. It's two different pots of money. But taxpayers, Harold started. Taxpayers benefit from having major crimes solved, Sarah interrupted. That's how the system works. You enabled the recovery of hundreds of millions in stolen assets. That's worth something. You're worth something. She stood to leave. You don't have to decide today. Think about it. Talk about it. But understand that if you decline, the money just goes back to the general treasury. It doesn't help the victims more. It doesn't help anyone. It just disappears into government coffers. After she left, Harold and Dorothy sat in stunned silence. $53 million. After a lifetime of struggling, of sacrificing, of choosing integrity over comfort, they were being told their choice had value. Literal, quantifiable, Life-changing value. What do we do? Dorothy whispered. Harold looked at her, his partner of 51 years, his anchor, his conscience. What do you think we should do? I think, Dorothy said slowly, that we take it. Not because we deserve it more than anyone else, not because we're special, but because turning it down doesn't help anyone. And maybe, just maybe, we can use it to help people the way we couldn't when we were struggling ourselves. Harold nodded. It made sense. Terrible, wonderful, terrifying sense. But we don't become what Trent was, Dorothy continued firmly. We don't hoard it. We don't waste it. We use it right. We help our family. We help others. We prove that money doesn't have to corrupt. That doing right can be its own reward. But accepting recognition for doing right doesn't diminish what we did. Agreed, Harold said. 3 days later, they signed the paperwork accepting the reward. The money would take months to process and distribute. These things always did. But it was official. They were, on paper, if not yet in reality, wealthy. The news leaked within hours. Of course it did. Everything leaked. And the public reaction was somehow even more divided than before. Half the country erupted in celebration. Finally, they get rewarded for doing the right thing. Social media filled with support. Strangers set up GoFundMe pages, which Harold and Dorothy immediately asked to be taken down. Letters poured in, congratulating them, but the other half seethed with resentment. They get $50 million, while victims wait for restitution. The fact that the reward came from different funds didn't matter. The optics were terrible. Government pays out millions, while crime victims get pennies. Talk radio hosts had a field day. You want to know what's wrong with America? Couple finds stolen money. Government gives them 50 million taxpayer dollars for making a phone call. Harold and Dorothy stopped reading the news entirely. Stopped checking social media. Stopped answering unknown numbers. They focused instead on the letters from victims' handwritten thank you notes that kept arriving daily. You changed my life. One read, My mother can finally rest in peace knowing justice came. Said another, I can retire now. A third letter said, Because of you, I can actually retire. These letters, they kept. Filled boxes with them. Hundreds of voices saying what the angry mob never would. Thank you. You mattered. You made a difference. One evening, sitting at their kitchen table surrounded by letters, Dorothy said, Harold thought carefully. I regret that doing the right thing made us targets. I regret that we can't just be private people anymore. I regret that our grandchildren have to see their grandparents attacked online by strangers. He paused. But do I regret turning in the money? Reporting what we found? No, not for a second. Because look at these. He gestured to the boxes of letters. These are real people whose lives we changed. Not by being heroes, just by being decent. Dorothy reached across the table and took his hand. I was scared you might regret it. Might resent me for pushing you toward doing right, when doing wrong would have been easier. Never, Harold said firmly. You didn't push me anywhere I didn't already want to go. You just reminded me who we are, who we've always been. People who might struggle but don't steal. People who might suffer but don't cheat. People who look at themselves in the mirror and want to see someone worthy of respect. Even if the world doesn't respect us, Dorothy asked. Especially then, Harold replied. Because the world's opinion changes with the wind. But our character, that's ours. No one can take it unless we give it away. They sat in their small kitchen, in their modest house, with $53 million being processed in their name, and the weight of countless strangers' judgments pressing down. But they held hands, and they breathed, and they knew bone deep, soul certain that they'd chosen correctly. Not the easy choice, not the comfortable choice, but the right one. And somehow, in a world that seemed to reward selfishness and punish integrity, they'd proven that doing right could still matter, could still have value, could still change lives, including their own. 6 months after finding the cabin, Harold Mitchell stood in line at the bank, holding a cashier's check he'd never imagined touching. $53,400,000. After taxes, it came to $34,800,000, more money than he'd earn in 20 lifetimes of ranger work. Dorothy stood beside him, her hand in his, both of them trying to process the surreal moment. The bank manager, a woman they'd known for 30 years, kept glancing at the check amount and then back at their faces like she couldn't quite reconcile the numbers with the modest couple standing before her. "Are you sure you want to put it all in one account?" she asked for the 3rd time. "For now," Harold said. "We're meeting with financial advisors next week. Real ones, vetted by the FBI and our lawyer. But until then, we want it somewhere safe." The transaction took less than 15 minutes. A lifetime of poverty ended with a few signatures and a receipt. They walked out of the bank into the spring sunshine, their net worth transformed, but their old Subaru still parked at the curb waiting for them. "We should probably get a new car," Dorothy observed. "Probably," Harold agreed. "But not today. Today we do something more important." They drove to the address Sarah Winters had given them, a small apartment complex on the edge of Denver. 3rd floor, Unit C. Harold knocked, and after a moment, Margaret Patterson opened the door. She was the woman who'd written the first letter. The widow whose husband had died, never knowing justice would come. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," she said, tears already forming. "You didn't have to come all this way." "We wanted to," Dorothy said. "May we come in?" Margaret's apartment was small but immaculate, decorated with photos of a long life lived with someone she'd loved. Harold saw wedding pictures, vacation snapshots, grandchildren, and he saw something else, a framed newspaper article about their discovery, carefully cut out and preserved. They sat on her worn sofa, and Margaret made tea with shaking hands. "The FBI called last week," she said. "They said I'll be getting a check. $68,000. Not the full $82,000 we lost, but more than I ever dreamed I'd see again." "That's wonderful," Dorothy said sincerely. "It means I can stop working," Margaret continued. She was 79 years old and still worked part-time at a grocery store. "I can actually retire like Robert. And I planned all those years ago. I can visit my daughter in Oregon. I can breathe without constantly worrying about money." She looked at them with eyes that had seen too much hardship. "You gave me that. You gave me my life back." Harold reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "We came to give you something else." Margaret opened it carefully. Inside was a check, not from the FBI, not from the restitution fund, but from Harold and Dorothy personally. $20,000. "What is this?" Margaret whispered. "It's to make up the difference," Dorothy explained. "You lost $82,000. You're getting back 68. This makes it whole." "I can't accept this," Margaret said, trying to hand it back. "You can," Harold said firmly but gently. "And you will. Because that's what this money is for. Not to sit in a bank, not to make us feel important, but to actually help people who need it." People who suffered when they shouldn't have. Margaret cried then deep, shaking sobs that released decades of grief and stress and loss. Dorothy held her, while Harold looked away, giving her privacy in her moment of overwhelming relief. They stayed for an hour, drinking tea, looking at photos of Robert, hearing stories about a marriage that had survived everything except money troubles it didn't deserve. When they left, Margaret walked them to the door and said something Harold would never forget. You know what the greatest gift is? Not the money. It's knowing that somewhere in this world, two people chose to do right when they could have chosen to do wrong. You reminded me that goodness still exists. That's worth more than any check. Over the next month, Harold and Dorothy made 11 more personal visits to victims or their surviving family members. Each time, they brought a check to make up the difference between what was lost and what was being returned. Each time, they heard stories of lives broken by Marcus Trent's greed and slowly rebuilt through stubborn determination. They met Thomas Brennan, who'd lost his parents' money and carried guilt for 30 years. The restitution check gave him closure. Their personal check gave him enough to finally pay off the debt he'd accumulated, trying to support his parents through their final years. They met Jennifer Martinez, representing her deceased grandmother. The restitution went to Jennifer, who used it to start the business her grandmother had always dreamed of, opening a small bakery in Denver, called Abuela's Promise. They met Richard Palmer, the construction worker who'd lost everything. He used his restitution to move into a better apartment with a spare room so his grandson could visit more often. Harold and Dorothy's check paid for the grandson's first year of trade school. Each visit reinforced what they'd known instinctively when they closed that safe in the cabin. This money belonged to people who'd earned it through suffering. Giving it back wasn't charity, it was justice. But they also had their own family to consider. Sarah drove up from Denver one Saturday with all 3 grandchildren. They gathered in Harold and Dorothy's small living room, the same living room they'd lived in for 43 years. Nothing changed except what it represented now. We need to talk about your futures, Harold said, looking at Emma, Michael, and Sophie. Emma, 19 and serious, immediately tensed. Grandpa, if this is about money, it is, Dorothy interrupted gently. And you're going to let us talk because you're our granddaughter, and we've earned the right to help you. She pulled out 3 folders. Emma, you have $73,000 in student loans. As of this morning, they're paid off. All of them. Emma's face crumbled. She'd been working 2 jobs while attending college, stressed about debt that would follow her for decades. You can't. That's too much. It's not nearly enough, Harold said. You're also getting a trust fund. $500,000 that you can access once you graduate. Use it wisely, buy a house, start a business. Save it. Invest it. But know that you'll never have to struggle the way we did. The way your mother did. Michael, 17 and trying not to cry, was next. Dorothy said. Full ride, wherever you get in. Room, board, books, everything. Plus the same trust fund as Emma, $500,000 when you graduate. And a car, Harold added, with a small smile. Because I'm tired of worrying about you driving that death trap. Sophie, just 9 years old, didn't fully understand the numbers, but she understood that her grandparents were giving her something precious. You're getting an education fund, Dorothy explained. From kindergarten through college, every penny paid for. And when you turn 25, you'll get your own trust fund, same amount as your siblings. Sarah, their daughter, was openly crying now. Mom, Dad, this is too much. You should use this money for yourselves. We are, Harold said. by using it for you, by making sure our family never has to choose between medical care and groceries, never has to choose between college and working 3 jobs, never has to feel that weight we felt for so many years. But that was just the beginning. 2 months after receiving the reward money, Harold and Dorothy sat in a lawyer's office in Denver, signing papers to establish something that would outlast them both. The Mitchell Trent Restitution Foundation, the lawyer read aloud. Purpose: to provide financial assistance to victims of fraud, embezzlement, and financial crimes who fall through the cracks of legal restitution. They were seeding the foundation with $20 million. It would be managed by a professional board, with clear guidelines and transparent operations. The goal was simple: help people who'd been robbed but couldn't get justice through normal channels. Why Trent? The lawyer asked. Why include his name? Because we want people to remember, Dorothy said firmly. We want his name associated not with getting away with it, but with the help that came after. We want his legacy to be not the theft, but the repair. The foundation opened its doors 4 months later. The first grant went to a family who'd lost everything to a Ponzi scheme that collapsed before prosecutors could freeze the assets. The second went to an elderly man who'd been scammed by fake tech support calls. The third went to a single mother whose identity had been stolen and used to rack up debt that legally was hers to pay. One by one, person by person, the foundation did what the legal system couldn't or wouldn't. Not because it was efficient, but because it was right. Harold and Dorothy didn't do press for the foundation launch. They'd learned the hard way that media attention brought as much pain as praise. But word spread anyway through the networks of people who needed it: most victim advocacy groups, legal aid societies, financial counseling services. Applications poured in. Hundreds, then thousands. Stories that broke your heart. Families destroyed by trusted financial advisors. Elderly people bankrupted by romance scams. Veterans whose benefits had been stolen by predatory lenders. The foundation couldn't help everyone, but it helped enough, and every person helped was proof that Harold and Dorothy's choice in that cabin had been right. As the foundation grew, so did curiosity about Marcus Trent himself. FBI forensic accountants spent months piecing together his life, and slowly, a complete picture emerged. Marcus Trent had been a legitimate financial advisor for 12 years before the embezzlement began. By all accounts, he'd been good at his job, well-liked, trusted. But something had shifted in 1989. A market downturn, some bad investments, a few clients who demanded returns he couldn't deliver honestly. Instead of admitting the losses, he'd started covering them with other clients' money. A classic Ponzi scheme pattern. But unlike most schemes that collapse quickly, Trent had been smart, patient, methodical. He'd only taken from accounts he knew wouldn't be checked frequently. Elderly clients, pension funds, long-term retirement accounts. By 1991, he'd stolen over $40 million. That's when he'd executed his escape plan. He'd purchased the mountain cabin years earlier under a shell company name. He'd created multiple false identities. He'd mapped out his disappearance down to the smallest detail. On January 2, 1992, Marcus Trent had walked out of his Denver office and never returned. The FBI investigation that followed was massive, but ultimately fruitless. He'd covered his tracks too well. Witnesses reported seeing him at the Mexico border. Others claimed he'd flown to the Caribbean. Some believed he'd died by suicide. But the truth was simpler and sadder. He'd driven 3 hours north to a cabin no one knew about, and stayed there for 31 years. Alone. Sarah Winters shared these details with Harold and Dorothy during one of her visits. "We found journals," she explained. "Trent kept detailed records not just of the money, but of his life, his thoughts." She pulled out copies of several entries, names and identifying details redacted, but the essence preserved. Year 1. "I thought isolation would be freedom. It's a prison I built myself." Year 5. "I see their faces sometimes. The people I stole from. I tell myself they're fine, that they had other resources, but I know I'm lying." Year 10. "The money doesn't matter anymore. I could have $1 billion, and it wouldn't change the fact that I can't spend it, can't use it, can't even look at it without seeing what it cost." Year 28. "I am 73 years old, and I have never been more alone. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and I would trade it all for one honest conversation with another human being." The final entry was dated 3 days before the hunting party found his body. "I thought I was stealing freedom. I stole only emptiness. If anyone finds this, if anyone reads these words, know that I died rich and utterly, completely alone, and that was my truest punishment." Harold read the entries in silence. Then he set them down and said, "He was right. He did steal emptiness, and he died in the prison he built." "Do you feel sorry for him?" Sarah asked. Harold thought about it. "No. He made his choices. He destroyed hundreds of lives and spent 3 decades rationalizing it. But I do feel something like pity, because he could have stopped at any point, could have turned himself in, could have tried to make amends. Instead, he chose pride and paranoia over redemption. And that's tragic in its own way." Dorothy added quietly. "We were in his cabin, we slept in his house, we found his fortune, and we made a different choice. We could have become him, could have taken the money, and spent the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, trusting no one, imprisoned by our own greed. But we didn't. Because we understood something he never did. Real wealth isn't money. It's being able to sleep at night. It's being able to look at yourself in the mirror. It's being able to hold your spouse's hand, without shame, between you." The revelation of Trent's full story made its way into the media. And slowly, gradually, public opinion shifted. The people who'd mocked Harold and Dorothy's choice began to understand what the alternative would have meant. Living like Trent had lived paranoid, isolated, unable to enjoy the fortune he'd stolen. Dying alone in a cabin with millions of dollars and not a single person who cared enough to look for him. Couple who chose integrity over fortune now helping hundreds. Read one headline. "The Mitchells prove doing right still matters," said another. Slowly, the angry voices quieted. The death threats stopped. The harassment faded. What remained was something more solid. Respect. Their own town of Cedar Springs had been quiet through most of the media storm, watching from a distance, not quite sure what to make of their suddenly famous neighbors. But 8 months after the discovery, the town council organized something. Harold and Dorothy were invited to a community gathering at the town hall. They assumed it would be a small thing, maybe a plaque, a certificate, the kind of token recognition small towns give. They almost didn't go. Tired of attention. Craving privacy. But Sarah convinced them. "Just show up," she said. "Let people thank you. Let your community see you're still just you." So they went. And when they walked into the town hall, they found it packed. Not just with city council members, but with what looked like half the town. People standing in the back because there weren't enough chairs. Children sitting on the floor. Faces they'd known for decades and faces they'd never seen before. The mayor, a man named Robert Garcia, who'd been elected just 2 years earlier, stood at the podium. "We're here tonight," he said, "to recognize 2 of our own. Harold and Dorothy Mitchell have lived in Cedar Springs for over 40 years. They've been quiet neighbors, good citizens, the kind of people you could count on to help if you needed it. None of us knew what kind of character they really had until it was tested." He gestured to them. "Most of us heard the story. They found a fortune. They could have kept it. No one would have known. But they didn't. They reported it, gave it up, chose integrity over opportunity. And then, when they were rewarded for that choice, they didn't hoard the money. They used it to help others, to help victims, to help their family, to establish a foundation that's already changing lives." The mayor pulled out a framed resolution. "Tonight, Cedar Springs officially recognizes Harold and Dorothy Mitchell for demonstrating the highest standards of ethical conduct and community service, for showing our young people what real character looks like, for making our entire town proud to call them neighbors." The applause was thunderous. People stood. Some were crying. Harold felt his throat close up, emotion overwhelming him. Dorothy gripped his hand so tightly it hurt. But what came next was what really broke them. One by one, people stood and spoke. Not officials, not dignitaries, but regular people sharing small stories Harold and Dorothy had forgotten or never known were significant. "Harold fixed my water heater for free when I was unemployed," one man said. "Told me to pay him back when I could. That was 12 years ago. I tried to pay him later, and he wouldn't take it. Said helping neighbors was what neighbors do." "Dorothy tutored my daughter in reading," a woman shared. "Spent 2 hours every week for an entire school year. Never asked for anything. My daughter graduated college last year because someone cared enough to help her when she was struggling. They brought us meals when my husband had his heart attack." Another voice said, "Showed up every other day for 2 months with food and kindness. Didn't make a big deal of it. Just helped." Story after story. Small kindnesses Harold and Dorothy barely remembered, but that had mattered enormously to the people they'd helped. The message was clear. They'd been doing right their whole lives. The cabin had just been the biggest, most public example of who they'd always been. After the formal ceremony ended, people lined up to shake their hands, to say thank you, to tell them what their example meant. It took 2 hours before everyone had a chance to speak, and by the end, Harold and Dorothy were exhausted but fuller than they'd felt in months. Driving home in their old Subaru, they still hadn't replaced it, Dorothy said. "That was overwhelming." "Good overwhelming," Harold said. "The best overwhelming," she agreed. "Did you know we'd touched that many lives?" "I knew we'd tried," Harold said. "I didn't know it had mattered so much." "Everything matters," Dorothy said quietly. "Every choice, every small kindness, every moment we choose to do right, even when doing wrong would be easier. It all matters." A year after finding the cabin, Harold and Dorothy attended the final restitution ceremony. The FBI had successfully located and compensated 412 of the 473 victims listed in Trent's ledgers. 61 victims had passed away with no traceable heirs. The money allocated for them was redirected to a general victim compensation fund. Sarah Winters stood at a podium in a Denver hotel conference room, speaking to a crowd of people who'd waited over 3 decades for justice. Today marks the official closure of the Marcus Trent embezzlement case. Thanks to evidence discovered by Harold and Dorothy Mitchell, We've been able to return over $298 million to victims and their families. This includes the original $267 million in cash, plus proceeds from liquidating Trent's other assets, properties, offshore accounts, and investments. She paused, looking directly at Harold and Dorothy. None of this would have been possible without two people who chose integrity over opportunity, who found a fortune and gave it back, who reminded all of us that doing right still matters, still has value. The room erupted in applause. Harold and Dorothy stood, uncomfortable with the attention but understanding its importance. These people needed to acknowledge what had been done for them, needed to express gratitude that had been building for 30 years. Afterward, dozens of victims approached them personally. Some just wanted to shake hands. Others shared what the restitution meant. Medical bills paid, homes saved, retirement secured, peace finally found. One woman, probably in her late 70s, approached with tears streaming down her face. "My husband died 2 months ago," she said. "He never knew we'd get anything back. But I used my restitution check to pay for a proper headstone. He has a beautiful grave now, with his name and dates and the words, 'Beloved husband, that's because of you. You gave me the ability to honor him properly.'" Harold couldn't speak, just pulled the woman into a gentle hug while she cried against his shoulder. Dorothy stood beside them, her own tears falling freely, understanding that this human moment of grief acknowledged and dignity restored was worth more than any amount of money. 3 years after finding the cabin, Harold and Dorothy sat in their living room on a quiet Tuesday evening. The foundation was thriving, having helped over 700 people. Their grandchildren were flourishing. Emma had graduated college debt-free and was working as an environmental scientist. Michael was in his 2nd year at trade school, studying to be an electrician. Sophie was 12 now, confident and bright, talking about maybe becoming a teacher like her grandmother. The media attention had faded. They were no longer trending topics or dinner table debates. They'd become what they'd always been. Regular people who'd made an extraordinary choice and then returned to ordinary life. Except their life wasn't quite ordinary anymore. They'd kept their small house, but renovated it carefully. New roof, updated kitchen, repairs they'd been putting off for years. They'd bought a new car, nothing flashy, just reliable. They traveled occasionally, taking Sarah and the grandkids on trips they'd never been able to afford before, but mostly, they'd settled into a new rhythm of giving. The foundation was their main focus, but they also supported other causes. Quietly, the local library, the food bank, the animal shelter, scholarship funds at the high school. They didn't seek recognition, didn't want their names on buildings, just helped where help was needed. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd kept it?" Dorothy asked suddenly. Harold looked at her, surprised by the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not because I regret our choice, but because I wonder what kind of people we'd have become, whether we could have lived with ourselves, whether the money would have been worth the cost to our souls." Harold was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I don't think we could have kept it," he finally said. "Not really. Not just because it was wrong, but because it wasn't who we are. We would have cracked under the pressure. The guilt, the paranoia. We'd have become like Trent, prisoners of our own greed. Instead, we became this," Dorothy said, gesturing around their modest home, at the foundation paperwork on the coffee table, at the thank you letters that still arrived weekly in the mail. People who helped others. People who made a difference. People who can sleep at night," Harold added. "People who can look at our grandchildren And know we set an example worth following." Dorothy leaned her head on his shoulder. "We did good, didn't we?" "We did," Harold confirmed. "Not perfect, but good, and that's enough." 5 years after finding the cabin, Emma Mitchell stood at a podium at the University of Colorado, giving the commencement speech as valedictorian of her environmental science class. Her grandparents sat in the audience, beaming with pride. "When I was 19, Emma told the crowd of graduates and families, my grandparents did something extraordinary. They found a fortune, an actual fortune, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they turned it in. They chose integrity over opportunity. They chose to do right even when doing wrong would have been easier and more profitable." She paused, letting the story sink in. Everyone wanted to know why. Reporters, strangers, even some family members asked them why they didn't keep it. And my grandmother said something I'll never forget. She said, "Because we wanted to be people our grandchildren could be proud of. And you can't teach integrity by abandoning it when it gets hard." Emma's voice thickened with emotion. "Because of that choice, I'm standing here today, debt-free, with opportunities my grandparents never had. But more than that, I'm standing here as someone who watched 2 people prove that doing right still matters. That character isn't old-fashioned or naive. It's essential. It's everything." She looked directly at Harold and Dorothy. "Grandma, Grandpa, thank you for being exactly who you are, for showing me that real wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in being able to look at yourself in the mirror and like who you see. It's in knowing you made the world a little bit better. It's in legacy that outlasts money." The auditorium erupted in applause. Harold reached for Dorothy's hand, both of them crying openly now, overwhelmed by the realization that their choice had rippled out in ways they'd never imagined. It wasn't just about the victims they'd helped or the foundation they'd built. It was about the example they'd set for their own family, for their community, for anyone who'd heard their story and chose to do better because of it. 7 years after finding the cabin, Harold Mitchell passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80. He'd lived long enough to see the foundation help over 1,500 people, long enough to watch all 3 grandchildren graduate from college, long enough to know, absolutely and without question, that his life had mattered. His obituary was picked up by national newspapers, not because he was famous, but because his story had become legendary. Man who found fortune, chose integrity, dies at 80. The funeral was packed. Victims the Mitchells had helped traveled from across the country to pay respects. Foundation board members, FBI agents who'd worked the case, town officials, neighbors, friends, and family filled the church until people were standing in the aisles. But what Dorothy remembered most was the letter that arrived a week after Harold's death. It was from a woman named Patricia, one of the original Trent victims who'd lost everything in 1991. "Dear Mrs. Mitchell," it read, "I never met your husband in person, but his choice changed my life. The restitution I received allowed me to leave an abusive situation I'd been trapped in for years because I had no money. It gave me the resources to start over. I'm 78 years old, and because of what your husband did, I finally have peace. He saved my life in more ways than one. I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know he mattered." Dorothy read the letter at Harold's graveside. Just her and Sarah and the grandchildren. "He would have loved knowing this," she said through tears. That his choice saved someone, really, truly saved them. "It saved a lot of people," Emma said quietly, "including us. He showed us how to be good." John a 7 de Psalm. John a 7 de Psalm. Dorothy lived 4 more years, continuing Harold's work with the foundation, writing a book about their experience that became required reading in several ethics courses at universities across the country. She passed away at 83, surrounded by family, her last words reportedly being, "Tell Harold, I'm coming. Tell him, we did good." Their obituaries ran together in a special feature in the Denver Post. The couple who chose integrity. The Harold and Dorothy Mitchell legacy. The article detailed not just the cabin discovery, but everything that had followed. The foundation had helped over 2,300 people by the time Dorothy passed. The Mitchell grandchildren had established scholarship funds in their grandparents' names. Victims of the original Trent embezzlement had formed an advocacy group that lobbied for stronger protections for elderly investors. But the real legacy wasn't measurable in numbers. It was in the thousands of people who'd heard the Mitchell story and made different choices because of it. People who'd found wallets and returned them. People who'd discovered errors in their favor and reported them. People who'd had opportunities to cheat, steal, or take shortcuts, and chose the harder right over the easier wrong. Because Harold and Dorothy Mitchell had proven something the world desperately needed to see. That integrity wasn't naive or outdated. That doing right, even when it hurt, even when it cost, even when no one would ever know, was still possible, still valuable, still the foundation of a life well lived. 10 years after the cabin discovery, the Mitchell-Trent Restitution Foundation held a memorial ceremony. Over 300 people attended, victims they'd helped, community members whose lives had been touched, students who'd studied their example, strangers who'd been inspired by their story. Emma Mitchell, now a successful environmental consultant, spoke on behalf of the family. "My grandparents weren't extraordinary people," she said. "They were ordinary people who made an extraordinary choice. They found a fortune and gave it back. They received a reward and used it to help others. They had opportunities to rest, to retire, to enjoy their wealth, and instead they worked until their final days to make the world better." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "We live in a time when people often say integrity is dead, that everyone cheats, that honesty is for suckers. My grandparents proved that's a lie. They proved that character still matters, that doing right is its own reward, even when it comes with a monetary reward too, that the true measure of wealth isn't what you have, but what you do with it." The foundation announced that day that it was expanding its mission. In addition to helping fraud victims, it would now provide grants to young people demonstrating exceptional integrity, students who'd reported cheating even when it cost them socially, employees who'd blown the whistle on corporate wrongdoing, individuals who'd made hard ethical choices and suffered consequences for doing right. The Harold and Dorothy Mitchell Integrity Awards, the foundation director announced, because their legacy isn't just about money returned or victims helped. It's about proving that character matters. And we want to support the next generation who's trying to live by that principle. 20 years after the cabin discovery, researchers studying ethical decision-making published a paper titled "The Mitchell Effect: How Public Examples of Integrity Influence Societal Behavior." The study found that in communities where the Mitchell story was widely known and taught, there were measurably higher rates of honest behavior, returned lost items, reported errors, ethical choices in business dealings. The Mitchells demonstrated that integrity is contagious, the lead researcher explained. When people see real examples of ethical behavior being rewarded not just morally, but tangibly, it changes how they think about their own choices. It gives them permission to do right, even when it's hard. The cabin itself had been preserved by the state of Colorado as a historical site. Not celebrated, exactly, but acknowledged. A small plaque outside read, Marcus Trent Cabin, site where financial criminal Marcus Trent hid for 31 years with stolen fortune. Discovered by Harold and Dorothy Mitchell, whose choice to report, rather than keep the money, sparked the largest financial restitution in Colorado history, and reminded a generation that integrity still matters. School groups visited occasionally, part of ethics education programs. They'd stand in the basement where the safe had been, listen to the story, discuss what they would have done. And more often than not, after hearing the full story, the victims, the suffering, the Mitchell's choice, the ripple effect, students would leave saying they hoped they'd have the courage to do what Harold and Dorothy did, because that was the real question, wasn't it? Not whether you knew right from wrong. Everyone knew. The question was whether you'd have the courage to choose right, when choosing wrong was easier, safer, more profitable. Whether you'd be willing to sacrifice comfort for character. Whether you understood that some things matter more than money. Harold and Dorothy Mitchell had answered that question, and their answer echoed across decades, touching lives they'd never meet, inspiring choices they'd never know about, proving that one moment of integrity could ripple out forever. They'd been two ordinary people who'd stumbled into an extraordinary situation. They'd been scared, tempted, and very human in their struggle. But in the end, they'd chosen to be the people they wanted to be, rather than the people their circumstances might have made them. And that choice, that simple, hard, costly choice, had changed everything. Anyone can find fortune, if they're lucky. But only the truly wealthy understand that integrity, character, and peace of mind are treasures no amount of money can buy, and no circumstance can steal unless you give them away. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains where their story began, the Mitchell Foundation continued its work. Grandchildren carried forward their legacy. Victims they'd helped paid it forward to others. And somewhere, in ways large and small, people who'd heard their story made better choices because two elderly people had proven that doing right still mattered. Because for Harold and Dorothy Mitchell, and for everyone they inspired, the real fortune was never in that safe. It was in the mirror. It was in knowing they'd stayed true to who they were, even when the whole world was watching to see if they'd break. They didn't break. They stood. And in standing, they reminded the rest of us that the measure of a life isn't what you accumulate. It's what you do when tested. It's choosing character over comfort. It's understanding that real wealth is being able to sleep at night, look your family in the eye, and know you did right, even when it hurt. That's the legacy Harold and Dorothy Mitchell left behind. Not millions of dollars, though they helped distribute hundreds of millions to those who deserved it. Not buildings with their names, though the foundation bearing their name helped thousands. But something more lasting, proof that in a world that often rewards selfishness, integrity can still win. That in a time that celebrates shortcuts, taking the long, hard, honest road still matters. That, in an age of cynicism, choosing to be good truly, purely good, is the most radical, revolutionary, important thing anyone can do. They were just two people who found a fortune in a cabin during a blizzard. But what they really found was an opportunity to prove who they were. And they chose wisely. The end. Up next, two more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Click now to continue the journey with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that integrity matters that character counts, and that doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, is always worth it. Because tomorrow we have another story that proves heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes, they just wear ordinary clothes and make extraordinary choices.